Okay, so last time we're looking at our good dead friend Immanuel Kant, who we looked at previously in part 2, seeing that he was a deontologist and had his classic moral theory, the categorical imperative. Now, what Kant's trying to do is apply his moral theory to animals. And as we saw back in the ancient days of part 2, the way he divides up the universe is there are rational beings which have worth, intrinsic value, and then there's everything else, what he calls the objects of the inclination. And they only have value conditionally. They are valued if we value them. So, how do animals fit into this? Well, as Kant begins by saying, as we saw last time, they themselves have no intrinsic value because they are objects, they're non-rational. So one way they can get value is by us valuing them. And then in that regard, they'd be like any other object. So for example, my camera has no intrinsic worth of its own because it's not a rational being, but since it's my camera, it gets, if it's damaged or destroyed, then the harm is not to the camera, but to me. But Kant, in many ways you might say, is better than his theory, at least when it comes to animals. So how does he get it so we should be kind to animals? Well, it could be said he kind of smuggles it in. And here's how he does it with badly drawn illustrations. So we got people, and Kant's view is that we do have obligations to other people. This is because I'm a rational being, you're a rational being, we're all rational beings, and we have obligations to each other. One of them is, presented by Kant explicitly, that we're obligated to treat each other as ends and not just means. But animals, they're just objects for Kant. So why can't we just treat them like however? Well, here's his argument. He begins with the argument by analogy. And he says, if an animal, let's take a dog, acts in a way analogous to a person, such that if a person did all that for us, we'd be obligated to them. By analogy, this would create kind of an indirect obligation involving the dog. To be a little more concrete about it. Suppose you have a dog who's a loyal companion who protects you, watches over you, and maybe even saves your life. Now, if you had a human, a person who did that for you, who watched you, guarded you, protected you, and saved your life, and they got old, you would be wrong just to, put them out to pasture or, kill them, just because you didn't really want to take care of them anymore, because you have obligations to people. Now for Kant, again, we have no direct obligations to the dog. So if old Yella is getting really, old and long in the tooth, if someone just says, sorry, old Yella, your tooth is supposed to take care of, by old Yella, they wouldn't be wrong in the dog, because Kant says the dog cannot judge. Why then, for Kant, would it be wrong to just dispose of a dog that has served us loyally and well? Well, here's how he argues it. We have obligations to people. That's taken care of. But we have no obligations to animals. But he works out an indirect way. And kind of crudely put, here's the idea. He says that if we treat dogs, animals, cats, etc. badly, this will affect our character. So we will be less likely to treat other people in accord with our obligations that we have to them. So, crudely put, the idea is, if we don't treat animals well, we're more inclined to fail in our duties to other people. We have direct duties to other people, and so our duties to animals are indirect. We're obligated to treat other people well. If a person treats animals badly, then they're more likely to treat people badly, so that would be wrong. To use kind of a crappy analogy, one I always use is kind of like, can use like a training. Imagine you're a police officer going through like a virtual, they do this now, they have kind of, not really like cool virtual reality, they have virtual training, where they have like the shoot, don't shoot scenarios. And so they have like a screen showing like a traffic stop, and you've got your, your gun rigged up to the computer, and you're trying to judge, shoot, don't shoot. Now, the simulation, of course, is not a person. So you can shoot it all day, and it's not going to do harm to a person. But if a person just kind of screws around on their training, just shoots everybody, doesn't, awful job, doesn't take it seriously, that'll affect how they treat real people, non-simulations. So Kant's argument is kind of like that. You could say the same thing. Don't screw around in simulations because you'll pick up bad habits that will affect the real life. So if someone, just shoots too much in, training because they don't care because it's just simulation, they'd be more likely to shoot real people. And Kant's making a similar, basically it's illustrating Kant's argument that if we're bad to animals, we're bad to people. So we have indirect obligations to them. So he's able to have his cake and eat it too. Now before rolling through the rest of Kant, anything about the Kant stuff or his argument that needs more stuff? Now interestingly, abhorrently enough, the same sort of argument can be repurposed to talk about our ethical treatment of like robots, for example. Because where Google is working very quickly to build autonomous cars, autonomous robots, and there'll be a question of whether they're, how we should treat them. And one argument for why we should treat them well is Kant's argument. We may not know if the robot really is a person or not. It may act like a person, but you could use Kant's argument. We don't know for sure if, the bot is a person, but if we treat the bot badly, we'll be perhaps more inclined to treat people badly. So we should be kind to the robots. There's also the practical thing. If you're nice to the robots, when the robot apocalypse comes, maybe they'll kill you last, or kill you in a nice way. Something to think about. Now the next thing he turns to sort of support his point is a series of engravings by a fellow named Hogarth. Not the guy in the Iron Giant movie, but an engraver. And the engravings show basically the progress of a person towards badness. It shows him as a young child, being cruel to animals, then moving up to being cruel to people, then finally engaging in murder. And what Kant's looking at is basically a psychological thing. His claim is that if people are cruel to animals, they're likely to become cruel to people and perhaps become murderers. Now that's an empirical psychological question. And is he right? Do serial killers start with animals? Any serial killers here? Either no serial killers or smart serial killers. No, apparently, at least what's claimed, it could be mistaken, that Kant's sort of progression is something that is popularly accepted. Namely that people, not surprisingly, if someone's kind of cruel, they'll be cruel to animals, then they'll kind of work their way up. So perhaps he's correct about that. Now he notes and believes that we should be kind to animals, and he uses an example, Gottfried Leibniz, Leibniz, German philosopher. We won't look at him except for this mention in this class, but if you take the modern philosophy class or intro, you may get to see Leibniz. And Leibniz was a very kind person, and Kant presents that as an example of kindness. Now he does bring up kind of an interesting side point here. He does note that in England, that butchers, people who chopped up, animals for a living, and surgeons, people who chop up people for a living, were not allowed to serve on juries. And the reasoning is that they were hardened to basically suffer, so they'd be less, suitable for juries. And he ties that into his argument, by saying, if people are, making things suffer, they would tend to be hardened and would treat things worse. So, what kind of limitations does Kant allow regarding the treatment of animals? Well, he uses the example to illustrate it of vivisection. And viva, of course, means alive, section means coming up, And back before they had things like MRIs and X-rays, etc., if a scientist wanted to know what was going on inside a living creature, the only way to know was to cut it open. And so what they would do is vivisect animals. They would cut them apart while they were alive. And of course that is every bit as horrifying as it sounds. But back in the day, again before MRIs and so on imaging, that was the only way to do research. So Kant, he does take the view that that can be acceptable for research. Why? Well, his claim is that animals, again, are objects. They're things, they exist for our ends. So that would be acceptable. Now, what about, say, hunting animals for sport, or treating them cruelly for entertainment? Well, Kant argues against that on the grounds, not that animals have rights of their own, so we shouldn't do that, but on the grounds that how someone treats an animal will affect how they treat people. So sort of his conclusion is that it's morally okay to treat animals as ends, or rather sort of as means, because that's what they are. But he believes there should be moral limits, not because the animals have status, but because treating them badly will cause us to become worse people, and thus treat animals worse. Or so he claims. And then he died, he's still dead today. So is Kant right? Should we be nice to animals? Does that make us better people? Or is he wrong? Well, some people say they judge people by how they treat their pets, or if they have a pet at all. Is that a fair judgment? Does how a person treats their pets or animals, does that tell you stuff about them? So should we be kind to animals? If only so people should think we're cool.
Not like roaches.
Oh, roaches.
If that count.
No, they don't count.
I feel like it can tell you a lot about how you treat your pet, because that's somebody who's with you almost more than the average person. So like how I treat my dog is probably better than how I might treat a stranger, I feel.
Yeah. But should we be nice to our pets?
Yeah, I feel we should.
What about other animals? Like what about squirrels?
Like if you're chugging like rocks at squirrels.
Yeah, like chucking rocks at squirrels.
I mean, that tells you just a mean person.
Could be, unless the squirrel started it.
Yeah, because they.
Or if squirrels started you chucking it back, it might be a child. But
Like, some people don't mind running over squirrels, and some people just don't care, so.
Yeah, some people go for them, and some people just don't care. But should we care about the squirrels?
I don't think it's about caring or not caring. But it's not intentionally trying to hurt them.
Yeah, I mean, you could go, Kant's view, squirrels are just squirrels, they don't count, you might say. But someone who gets mean, decides, hey, lawnmower and squirrels, that's kind of fun. They might decide to move up to the people. And often, people who are horrible to animals, as Kant argued, they're often kind of horrible to the people. They're consistently awful people. Yeah, and you raise a good point about roaches. At what point, should an animal be considered? Yeah, things like mosquitoes are like, yeah, kill them all.
Right.
Yeah, but then we get up to like, squirrels. We get to cats and dogs. We generally, because they're, we relate to them more, we think we should treat them better. And the more delicious an animal is, generally, we think it's okay to eat them. I mean, for example, pigs. They apparently are as smart as dogs, if not smarter. They have personalities. If left to their own devices, they're very clean. And people actually have them as pets. I remember one of my neighbors had a little potbelly pig as a pet. And it acted just like a dog. It was out and all the dogs ran up and they're trying to figure out, what is this thing? And I was waiting for them to realize it's made of bacon. I thought this was going to help, but they're like, okay, it's a strange looking dog. Welcome to, the dog pack. Let's go do some dog stuff. Let's go chase some cats. And the dogs all kind of accepted the pig. They're like, this is cool. If only they knew it was made of bacon. There's probably the one dog sitting there, hey, this thing's made of bacon. Okay, now we turn to our last arguments. Now, one fairly easy way to argue about actually anything is the utilitarian argument. And as I mentioned before, back in the ancient days of part one, if you're working your paper, you're like, ah, crap, I can't think of a way to argue. Kind of a go-to thing is that in a way that almost writes itself is the utilitarian approach, which is basically, as we saw, it's the appeal to consequences. You weigh the pluses, the minuses against each other. To make it a moral argument, you argue that morality should be done on the basis of weighing things together, and then you just do the weighing, make that point. If it's more harm than good, you conclude it's bad, shouldn't do it. If it's more good than harm, conclude it's good, you should do it. Now this presents a pretty ideal way to argue either for treating animals better or against it. And I'll give two examples to illustrate it. Now, to make this work, what you have to do is, of course, have this standard. And the principle of utility is we saw when we looked at John Stuart Mill. And if you want to use that in your paper, an easy way to do it is just argument from authority. I'll be using John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism to argue for this. So cite source, problem solved. Now there's also the matter of the scope. In other words, if you want to argue, say, in favor of treating animals well, you'd have to make them count, be within the scope of morality. If you want to argue they don't count, one option is to claim they don't fall in the scope of morality, therefore it's okay to eat them or experiment on them. So, how do you argue animals are morally relevant, or anything? Well, one easy way to do this, a kind of a standard or stark argument, is, we saw this in John Stuart Mill, is to look at what is the value. And if we take, did I have another roll? Almost forgot. Near the tragic oversight. If we look at what's considered a value or utility, and so one standard way to do this is to go to John Stuart Mill. What's considered to have positive value is happiness, or as he put it, pleasure and the absence of pain. What's a negative value is unhappiness, that's to say, pain and the absence of pleasure. And so if you wanted to argue how animals or anything have value, you could say, well, if happiness, pleasure, has positive value, anything that can feel pleasure would count. So if you're, measuring out the total happiness in the universe, anything that can feel happy would matter. Similarly, if unhappiness is bad, then if you're toting out, sort of calculating the entire unhappiness in the universe, anything that can feel that would matter. So one approach is to argue, well, if pain is bad and pleasure is good, then things that can feel pleasure and pain would matter. Now that can of course be countered. Some might say, well, pleasure and pain do matter, but only the pleasure and pain of certain beings. To use a particular example, we looked at ethical egoism, and if someone's an ethical egoist, pain and pleasure would matter, but only things, because they're not concerned about, in that regard, morally about others. So what would the argument template look like? Well, it's essentially the standard appeal to consequences. The first step would be laying out the plus, the positive value, the benefits. Second, laying out the minuses. Thirdly, to make it a moral argument, you need some reason, perhaps an argument from authority or applying a moral theory, as to why doing this plus minus thing would be the way to assess morality. Kind of the easy way to do this, as I mentioned, is just refer to John Stuart Mill, just to use the method of applying a moral theory, or even an argument from authority, and that step is taken care of. The fourth step is weighing the pluses and minuses. And then the fifth step is drawing the appropriate conclusion. If more pluses than minuses, good. If more minuses than plus, bad. Now, what about objecting to this? Suppose you're building your paper and use, again, this applies not just to the animal stuff, but also to any argument of the appeal to consequences type. Now, an easy way to reply, raise an objection to this, one is, as we saw before, you may object by saying that a positive is not actually a positive, it might be a negative. Or a negative is not actually a negative, it's a positive. And depending on, a person's values, that could, what one person regards as a positive, another person can regard as a negative. To use like a non-moral example, think about having like a lot of autonomy in a job. Some people really like that. They like, freedom to do what they, unsupervised. Someone else may see that as a minus because they really like to be carefully guided with clear goals. And so when assessing what's positive and what's negative, you could object by saying, no, that's not positive, that's a minus. Or that's not a minus, that's a plus. Another way to object to this is in the weighing. Because people could agree that some things are plus and some things are minus, but they might disagree about how they weigh against each other. So for example, to use a non-moral example, think of like picking between jobs. People may agree that more pay is good, and they may agree that having less free time is bad, but they may disagree about how much those weigh against each other. So one person may say, oh, this job would be not a job I want, because good pay, but not enough free time. And free time is really important. Whereas someone else may say, well, free time is important, but more pay is more important, so this would be a good job. So, in regards to the objection, one could contend against the weight. Now, of course, in the reply, because in the paper you take your position, argue for it, consider at least one substantial moral objection against it, and then reply back to that, the reply would basically be doing kind of the same thing, getting back and defending your original argument, saying why the objection doesn't work. And again, an appeal to consequences, the utilitarian approach, provides an excellent model for doing just about anything. It's when I have to crank on a blog quickly, it's my go-to thing, because it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then objection, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, reply 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, done, blog cranked out. Or in this case, paper done. So it would be two concrete examples. Well, suppose we want to argue against treating animals kind of badly, like against eating them. Well, one thing we could do is, use that exact pattern. So we can use, I actually use a real story from my own life. For 18 years, well, less than 18 because I couldn't eat solid foods when I was like 1. Veal Parmesan was my go-to every birthday. My mother would say, what do you want for your birthday? Your birthday meal? Veal Parmesan, ancient food cake. And that's like every year. Until I went to college. Thanks, college. Teaching me things that ruined my life. Too late now, you're already here. But make a list of all the ways college ruined your life. And if you like veal, at this point you want to go like this. No, because I'm about to ruin veal for you, possible. This is how it's ruined for me. So, I took a class, in philosophy, thanks philosophy, and had to read a book called Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. And it's basically just utilitarian after utilitarian argument against things like factory farming, experimenting on animals, etc. And one of the part was, of course, on veal. Now, on the plus side for veal is delicious. I haven't had veal since I was 18, and I can still taste it. And I still crave it. If I see it, when I go, like I was in Publix this morning, they had veal, and it's like, oh, I know, don't do it. I still want it really badly. So the plus is veal is really delicious and really enjoyable. Super delicious. The minus side, though, is, you know how they make veal?
Like keep the cow like standing up for like long hours until it gets like nice and tender and meat.
Mhm. Yeah, they gotta make that meat tender.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they would have it in a very, very small pen, because if the calf moves around, it starts getting muscle tone. And so it's gotta be held in place. And I still remember the picture in the book. It showed like, you know, they wouldn't really tend to it, because it's, you know, they're just gonna kill it soon. And so the hoofs, you know, were not trimmed, they were just growing up, and they were just standing in its own filth. You know, that's not key, you know, filth is not key to making veal, at least now. And what they would do is they'd feed the veal a liquid diet, which would give it like terrible diarrhea. And so the calf it's a young calf suffering horribly, and then it's just, you know, killed. And so I weighed that, my enjoyment against the suffering of the calf, and when I weighed it, my decision was the suffering of the veal, it far exceeds the enjoyment I get out of it, I can't eat veal. And of course people made the usual argument, that kind of the objection, well, you're not saving any veal calves because your lack of eating veal doesn't reduce the number of veal calves at all. It just means there's like one slice of veal that goes.
In fact, I think if you don't eat it, it goes to the trash.
Yeah, it goes to waste. It goes to waste. Yeah. But the moral argument is, well, one way to look at it is that I don't want to be a party to that, you know, that crime. Just because other people, I mean, people commit murder, and if someone says, well, they're just going to murder people anyways, so why not get in on that? Oh, no. So that's my reason I gave a veal, because I looked at the suffering, my enjoyment, and the suffering far away, which is why I think there should be no veal. As much as it hurts me to say that. Now, a similar argument would be given against pâté foie gras. That was easy to give up, because I've never had that. And so it's easy to give things you never had or don't like. Anybody know how that's made, or what it is? Pâté foie gras? It's goose liver. Now, the way they make it is, you know, it'd be one thing if they just killed the goose and pull out the liver. I have no problem with that, because I don't really like geese, because they are nature's jerks. As I said, I'm on record. They are jerks. And I would punch a goose in the face. I would. Actually, when I was a kid and hunting, I really wanted to shoot them, because they're delicious and annoying, which is a great combination, because you don't feel bad when you shoot them. You're like, you deserve this goose. Pow! Delicious. But even though I don't like geese, except its deliciousness, pâté foie gras I think is horrible. Not just because it's like pretentiously French, like myself. I don't like the competition. But because, here's how they make it. They take geese and they force feed them until their liver is distorted. And goose like to eat, but no one likes having a funnel stuffed in their face and force fed. So the goose actually suffers, and their liver gets distended. And even though I don't like geese, and I would totally punch them in the face, I would not wish that suffering on geese. And so when I weighed that, well, never had it, so I don't like it, so I have no goose in the game. But, you know, I'm against the suffering of animals. So I'd say we shouldn't have that because the goose suffers too much for our enjoyment. And of course, the same argument could be given against all meat, which is why I feel really morally bad every time I eat meat, because I know what I'm doing is wrong. Yet I keep on doing because I'm a bad person. Oh, because of suffering.
Yeah.
Because the animal suffers. I mean, they go through. I mean, I feel no guilt when because I grew up hunting, and if I killed an animal, in basically combat, the animal's got a chance against me, because they can hitting a flying bird. I mean, I got a gun. That's clearly a pretty good advantage, but they're quick. I mean, I missed more birds than I hit. And so that's competition. I'm killing a bird, I take it home, I eat it. It dies fast. And in fact, one of the things I learned while hunting, is people often say now hunters are bad people, but I learned most of my morality from hunting. Because I remember one time, it really stuck with me this day. My father hit a bird and just wounded it, and it was able to keep on flying and land it. And he knew it was going to suffer. So he got in the boat and went after that bird, tracked that bird down. Not because he didn't want the bird to get away, because he didn't want it. He knew it was just gonna. It was crippled, and it was just gonna get gangrene and just die horribly. And so the lesson I learned was, if you hurt something, wound it, it's your responsibility. You don't let it suffer. You go and you put it out of its misery. Now, you could say you shouldn't be shooting birds in the first place, but it's moral accountability. You don't let things suffer, even if it's a considerable inconvenience to you. And so I learned that. So I'm willing to kill animals, to eat them, as long as I treat them, this may sound weird, with respect, and it's a quick, clean kill. That's what I do. Now, when I get like the farmed, beef or pork or chicken, the odds are that chicken, had a rough life. It might have its beak chopped off and maybe in its own feces, getting suffering. Or the same with like pigs, dwelling in filth. And so, on this utilitarian argument, I enjoy it. I'm a beast. I enjoy eating the flesh of other creatures, ripping them apart with my teeth. Well, after they're properly cooked and seasoned, of course, we all do. But I realize that the suffering of the animal probably outweighs my enjoyment. So morally, on the utilitarian argument, I would say what I'm doing is wrong. I'm a bad.
Who's the judge of it outweighing the enjoyment?
Excellent point. Which gives us the counterpoint. Because, I'm saying the suffering of the animal outweighs my enjoyment. And a good counter. Yeah, my personal enjoyment.
Okay.
So someone else could say that their enjoyment is so, they could, instead of, one way is just totally selfish and say, they don't even count. It doesn't even enter, they don't even matter. So I don't, or as one of my friends says it, the suffering makes it taste better. I'm like, you are a bad person. So one approach to say they don't even count. They're out of the equation. They're just pigs and chickens, etc. Another approach is the one you suggest, which is who does the weighing? Because someone might look at it and say, well, yeah, it's kind of rough on that, the pig or the chicken, to suffer. But you could say as long as, and some people have some, qualms about it. Like if they knew that, the pig was like tortured for 6 months, whipped with barbed wire, etc., and set on fire, while it's still alive, they might be like, no, I don't want that barbed wire whipped, burnt alive pig. But if they know the pig, was like free range, and then when it got old enough, they mercifully, just nail gunned it in the head or something, quick, clean death. Then you might say, yeah, it suffered, getting shot in the head was probably not a lot of fun, but it was quick, and a decent life, so my enjoyment outweighs that of the pig's suffering. And yeah, so you can make that case, that our enjoyment of eating them outweighs the pain they feel at being killed, and, well, they don't feel being eaten, hopefully, but being killed. Yeah, so the counter argument would be, the initial argument was suffering outweighs enjoyment. The way to object against that is the enjoyment outweighs the suffering. Or to go hardcore, to say the animal doesn't count at all. It doesn't enter into the picture at all. So it doesn't matter how much it suffers. All that matters is, I enjoy eating the animals. So flipping it around, that could be an argument for eating animals. If we take happiness to be, good, and unhappiness to be bad, we could say, yeah, the animals do suffer, but if people really enjoy eating it, like bacon, so it is, that we weigh them, we'd say, yes, a person would be happier eating meat than not eating meat. Has anybody ever had the vegetarian hot dogs?
They taste the same.
No, they do not. That is totally not true.
To me, like the veggie patties.
Oh, patties do. Patties are
okay.
good. I like, like veggie hamburgers.
Yeah, they taste the same.
They taste pretty good. But the hot dogs, which is weird because
I've never tasted.
with a hot dog, you think it's like just hoofs and sphincters that's stuck in it, it's like animal. It's not even really, well, it's technically animal because it's like hair and hoofs and stuff. And you think that'd be easy to assimilate. But the veggie hot dogs are, because I have friends who are vegetarians, so when they come over, like, I have like the meat stuff, then the non-meat stuff. And I always like to play vegetarian roulette, where I don't tell them like which is which. I don't, actually, because I have a friend who hates vegetarian stuff. And so it's like, it's bad for both of them, because they're like, which is which? I'm like, choose wisely. No, I do tell, eventually I do tell them, but it's funny. It's funny while they're sort of looking, and they won't eat until they know that it's there and sort of stare at it. They go, no, it's like. Well, the vegetarian hot dogs are just horrible, because I tried them, it was like Play-Doh, literally stuffed in like a casing. I'm just like,
You went like ketchup and mustard and cheese?
It didn't help. It's like putting ketchup and mustard on Play-Doh. I mean, it's like a roll of Play-Doh. I was like, God, I can't eat this. And I felt kind of bad. I'm like, there are dead animals in here, but I just can't eat that Play-Doh stuff. But other things like the veggie patties, those are actually pretty good. You put all kinds of spices and stuff in them with the hot dogs.
I never tasted that.
Don't. Do not.
Because my sister's vegetarian.
Don't waste your well, if it's free, give it a little try,
Mhm.
but don't spend money on it until you test it because
It's not
it's not good. Yeah, so you could argue, well, the enjoyment of eating meat versus the suffering of eating vegetarian stuff outweighs it. You know, so if it's choice between having like a real hot dog and a veggie hot dog, you might say, sorry pigs and chickens, and you just gotta die for my hot dog. Now another argument about utilitarian argument would be, well, we can move away from eating stuff to like medical, testing. I don't mean like bringing a new shade of eyeshadow into the world or new lipstick, but actually, testing things like, potential like cancer treatments, high blood pressure method, etc. And one way, of course, we test them is, after sort of like initial chemical, sort of like, let's make this chemical, then we know about other chemicals, it may work this way. But of course, eventually you gotta put it, into a living creature. So one argument is that it's morally acceptable to, test them on animals because of the benefits. So basically the way we break it down is, well, what's the plus of testing medicines on animals as opposed to not testing them?
I mean, it allows humans to see if the medication works.
Yeah.
Initially,
Yeah, because if you didn't test it, you're just like, okay, got cancer, try this. So you might say that, the testing does confer, an advantage. We can see whether things work or they don't. Or we can see if they have, potentially harmful side effects or not. Now, to make the argument, usually what we do is we'd argue that, well, two ways to do it, at least. One way is to argue that humans, people, are greater than animals. Whatever that is, some of the thing. And therefore, we should test on animals because they matter less. I mean, to use like a crappy analogy, if you were like, if you wanted to test like whether, you wanted to like see if something could break, you wouldn't take your iPad and whack it against something to try to break it, because the iPad, you take a stick, because stick is cheap, iPad expensive. So you don't want to risk something more expensive. Like if you wonder, like, I wonder how much it would take to break this. You wouldn't grab your iPad and start beating with your iPad, because that would be a bad idea. Likewise, if you wonder, does this actually work? If you consider humans to be more valuable than animals, you would test on the animal first, because if the animal dies, that's less of a loss than killing a person. Or you might argue that testing on people would create more suffering. People are capable of more depths of suffering. People have friends and family and so forth. So it would, whereas lab rats, don't. And also people have lawyers that could sue. So you might say that, well, humans are not necessarily superior to animals. Their suffering would be, there'd be more harm created testing on people. And so you could argue that if we're going to test, and if we have to test, we should test on animals, because doing so would create fewer harms than, testing on people. And if we didn't test, then we could end up harming, if we just use untested medicines, harm to people. And you can even argue for the benefit of the animals. You could say, well, if they're trying to test medicines and it helps them, if they have that condition, that's an advantage. And it can also help other animals as well. So you could give an argument for animal testing that way. As long as people are not being just needlessly cruel to animals, or just testing, useless stuff like new, lipsticks or something. You can make the argument on the grounds that it actually brings about some good. Now, the counter people often do against that is, this would be a case of, you could say, well, we really don't need to do this, so you could actually do something better. Now, one thing people have argued for is that thanks to technology, we don't actually have to use animals anymore. We can do virtual testing, basically computer simulation. But the counter that people often present is, well, the simulations aren't as good as the actual animals. And then people argue back, and forth on that. Because some people, I think, they just want to torture rats, to be honest. They're just like, someone sticking needles in rats, they really like. So that's the utilitarian method. And again, if you're still looking for a paper topic or a way to argue, you're like, yeah, I don't know how to argue. This works pretty well for the animal stuff. We can use it for anything. I mean, for example, to use a closing example with non-humans, as I mentioned, we're developing, one of the new developing technologies is, robots and artificial intelligence. And as might be imagined, even though it's, pretty much science fiction now, there is the concern about how we treat, those machines. Because you may have the question of, if we build a machine that's complex enough, like in science fiction, like, Ex Machina or Star Wars, get R2-D2 and C-3PO, the question would be is, we want to build these things usually to do our dangerous and crappy jobs. We want to have, like, a robot to clean our house. We want to have a robot to go on the battlefield and, get shot at and shoot stuff. We want to put them on probes and send them out to space, or send them into reactors. So all the stuff that's dangerous and awful. But then, of course, there's the moral question, would that be okay to do, morally? And it's similar to the question about animals. There is the question of what is the status of those non-humans? Are they just, to use the derogatory term from Battlestar Galactica, are they just toasters? Just, machines. In which case it doesn't matter. Sure, you don't want to you don't want to break your expensive machines, but they have no moral status. They're just things. Or are they actually beings that can have moral worth? Now, on the utilitarian look, you look at it in terms of the question would be, can they be beings such that they can have value? Can they experience, what is of utility? One way, if we go by, pain and pleasure, easy way to fix that is just make them so they don't feel pain or pleasure. Problem solved. So if we build, intelligent machines that don't feel pain or pleasure, if we accept, pain and pleasure as measures of worth, they wouldn't matter because you could not hurt them. You could break like their arm, but they wouldn't hurt them. They'd be like, they might have a protocol or like some other program like, please don't break my arm, but it wouldn't hurt them. It would have no, and if pain is a measure of negative value, you couldn't wrong the robot. Similarly, if they can't feel pleasure, they could have no positive value. And so if utilitarianism is right, the part about the value in pain and pleasure, machines that were intelligent, that could not feel pleasure and pain wouldn't matter. Unless how we treated them affected us. So if a person became worse and harmed other people, we might say that would be a bias. So if you're looking for like a paper topic that's beyond the cutting edge, one thing might be, the interesting thing might be the ethics of how we treat our treat robots, intelligent machines in the future, before they kill us all. Google's going to build all those killer machines. Spoiler alert, Google kills us all. That's how it ends. And with that, the end of part 3. So be sure to complete exam 3, quizzes part 3 by end of day today. And if you want to do a draft, be sure to get that by November 16th. And otherwise, have a good weekend, morally or otherwise.
Wait, first,